It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Milsey, back with Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Milsey Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest out brew a Magic world. And as always, the deck list is going to be down in the description below. Today we are finishing up our last precon from the Fallout set of Commander decks, the Wise Mothman. This is the Mutant Menace deck. And this deck was a ton of fun to upgrade. I'm not normally a giant fan of Mill, but I think Sultai is probably one of the better colors to do it in. And I think the Mothman's pretty cool. 4-mana, 3/3 insect mutant with flying. It says whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. The rad counter is a mechanic where start your pre-combat main phase, mill a card for each rad counter you have. If it's a non-land card, you lose a life and get rid of that rad counter. And then whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. I think there's a lot of ways we can go with Mothman, but what I decided to do is really focus on milling and then growing our creatures by milling our opponents. Yes, we can mill ourselves, and we'll talk about some of the ways we can kind of take advantage of milling ourselves, but I really think we want to mill our opponents and grow our creatures and become that big threat that we can through milling. Well, some of the ways that we're going to go through milling our opponents are some of the normal ways you're going to see with milling. Cards like Fractured Sanity, milling each opponent for 14 cards. Maddening Cacophony, milling 8 or milling half the library rounded up. Alter Your Brood, whenever permanent comes out of our control, each opponent mills a card. Mind Crank, whenever we deal damage to an opponent or whenever they lose life, they mill that many cards. Memory Erosion, whenever they cast a spell, they mill. A Nuke Launcher, whenever a creature attacks until the end of the player's next turn, when they cast a spell, they get 2 rad counters. We want to try our best to mill as many times in short bursts, right, to take care of Mothman's second ability. So maybe, Fractured Sanity may not be the best thing in the world, but I don't mind actually cycling Fractured Sanity to make everybody mill 4. The biggest question mark I have as far as these abilities go is, would Mothman's second ability count each of our opponents milling their decks as separate occurrences or all together? If it's all together, then it's maybe not as good, but I think it's still important because if we're going to bother to mill them out, let's at least go deep and make sure we're really milling them. Well, part of the Mothman and part of our deck is that we're going to get rad counters ourselves, and so we're going to end up milling ourselves. So we want to find a way to kind of get out of that. First is using something like Muldrotha, where our opponents remove our things or we mill ourselves. It's going to allow us to play things back out of our graveyard. Young Deathclaws is a pretty cool ability. Each creature card in our graveyard has Scavenge, so we can exile it and put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that card's power on target creature. And a lot of our deck cares about these mutants a type, so I like that Young Deathclaws is not only a great creature in itself, 4/2 with menace, but its ability will help grow our creatures. And then Oversold Cemetery, if we have 4 more creatures in our graveyard, we can return one of them from our graveyard to our hand. Just again, help getting things back out and allow us to reuse them and go for it that way. But that second ability, right, with Mothman isn't just about, it's not just about milling our opponents, but growing our creatures. The deck has things like Branching Evolution, just to double the amount of counters that we put on our creatures. But we also have Corpsejack Menace and Winding Constrict in the deck. And both of these are going to double the amount of counters that are going to be put on our things. And it will actually give us an extra rad counter with Winding Constrictor. But again, the point is more +1/+1 counters on each of our things so that they grow bigger and bigger and they can hit harder and harder. And to help them hit harder, we're going to use things like Dust Shell Crawler to give those +1 creatures with +1 counter trample. Herald of Secret Steams to give them unblockability, and things like Hancock Ghoulish Mayor, who says that each other creature that's a zombie or mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on it. So as we grow the board with Hancock out, we will continue to grow the board. And I think these are the things that are important as an end goal. Mill our opponents, grow our creatures, and still try to end the game in combat, even though it might be easy to think we're just going to mill our opponents out. In all reality, we really want to try to win the game by, buffing our creatures up and ending the game that way, because 297 cards is a lot of cards to mill, minus everyone's starting hand. So still, it's a lot of cards to mill. And unless we really want to commit to it, I think the growing our creatures is the important part. There's a lot of cards in the deck that care about this, but this is just some of the kind of highlights as far as the things like that. But like I've said on Millsy Brews in the past, no deck is ever finished, and this is just our first 1.0 list of the deck. And there were a couple cards that I really were considering, but I couldn't find a spot for. But I think as we do more testing, we would learn exactly where we want the deck to be. Wave Goodbye is a card that can bounce all creatures without a +1/+1 counter onto its owner's hand. Could pave the way for our creatures and help us finish the game that way. Court of Cunning, if we want to go really for the mill plan, can mill any players for 2 cards each for upkeeps, and if we're the Monarch, 10 instead. And then if we want to play a little more into our graveyard, we could use things like Life from the Loam, start dredging more cards into our graveyard. The cool part about Mothman is it doesn't say our opponents milling those cards, it says anyone milling those cards. So if we do mill ourselves, we could equally do the same thing with Mothman, which I think is kind of interesting. I just think it's going to be a lot harder to make it really, really work the way I think kind of this plan goes. But let's get into our goldfish as we always do. Keeping a 2-lander with a Soul Ring and Arcane Signet certainly feels right. Our commander is 4 mana, so we certainly want to get there. We will get the Undergrowth Stadium in on turn 1, and that allows us to go Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. Now, if your playgroup's anything like mine, this will draw you a little bit of hate at the table, but this should hopefully get us towards a turn 2 Mothman. The only problem is that Drowned Catacomb is going to come in tapped right now, so hopefully we can draw any other land that comes in on tap, but we'll see. Turn 2 we draw Viridescent Bog. That'll certainly work. That'll give us the green and the black, and the blue will come from the Arcane Signet for us to play the Wise Mothman. Turn 2 Wise Mothman doesn't seem bad at all. When it ETBs, everybody's going to get a rag counter. So I'll just put one here so we remember what it is. And then whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter. So we would go ahead and pass the turn. Our opponents would start. They would mill their card, and if it is a non-land card, Mothman gets a counter. Same thing for other 2 opponents. So the cool part is Mothman could come back to us as a 6/6 or anywhere in between, and now it's a threat in the air for our opponents to deal with. But we'll come back to our turn. Drowned Catacomb in tapped. We've got a couple choices. Blowfly Swarm's an interesting card, coming in with 5 counters, and if damage would be dealt to it, we remove a counter from it. And then give that many players rad counters. So Blowfly Swarm's kind of an interesting card. We have Glowing One. Whenever it deals damage to a player, they get 4 rad counters, and whenever a player mills an on-land card, we gain a life, or we have the Branching Evolution to kind of keep the party going. With access to 5 mana this turn, because that Drowned Catacomb is tapped, we unfortunately cannot play 2 things. We can only play 1 thing. We could copy the Wise Mothman with Spark Double, which actually could be kind of fun if we want to go that route. We also could, I really like the idea of something like Glowing One to kind of get it online. Death Toucher is going to become harder and harder to block. I think for the purposes of this game, I would probably go with the Spark Double copying Mothman. I realized that we should have... Did we draw that Spark Double? We actually should have milled it, shouldn't we have, because of the rad counter? Yeah, that's on me. All right, so we'll draw the next thing. I apologize. You're right. Now that I think about that, we should have milled that Spark Double off of the rad counter, and we draw the Master Transcendent. When it ETBs, target player gets 2 rad counters, and we can put a creature card that was milled from this turn onto the battlefield, and it becomes a mutant, which is a really cool ability for this deck, allowing us to get our opponents things. I think I would put that down, give one of our opponents we like or think has the most creatures in their deck some rad counters, and pass the turn. Now, unfortunately, people are going to be out of rad, or sorry, we would attack with Mothman, but unfortunately, other than that person with the rad counters, no one's going to mill anything. And of course, if they mill 1 non-land card, we would get our choice of who we want to put the counter on. At this point, I'd probably still keep out the Mothman. Unfortunately, right now with the Master, we need to be milling some more to make the Master's ability really worth it, right? As the opponent that we gave the 2 rad counters this turn, even if they milled a creature, we can't do anything with it. But, all right, 7 mana here. Now we can play multiple things. I kind of like the... Well, right now, I guess we have no way to mill... we have no way to mill our opponents right now. So glowing One seems cool. Branching Evolution seems cool. Hit somebody again with the Mothman in the air, hopefully. Maybe next turn we can load up the glowing one to deal some damage to somebody. Draw next, and we do have the Lumbering Mega Sloth here. We could get down. We would have at this point 3 or 4 counters on Mothman, so it's 7 or 8 mana, and it could get better as we go. I'd probably try to take a shot with the glowing one at somebody, see if they're willing to block a 2/2 Death Toucher. If not, they get 4 red counters. Put the Mothman at somebody, and just kind of go from there. I guess I'd probably just put the Bloat Swarm in and see if this gets through. If it gets through, then we could potentially have a good play here with getting counters or getting something back, and that's what I would do. If they do, it does hit somebody and they mill a creature, we take it with the Master. If not, we put some counters to the Wise Mossman. Come back to our turn, Alter the Brood's definitely going to help. And then I would just get the Mega Sloth down. Everybody's going to mill one. If they hit something good, we can Master it and tap it and take it. Otherwise, we may be able to get some counters here, and then, again, take another shot with the glowing one. This kind of feels like an awkward state for a board state because we're missing some of the punchier stuff that we have, but I think Alter the Brood's really going to help us at this point in just trying to make sure we can punch through for some more things. And the next turn, we'll draw Rampaging Yogwai. Can come in with counters on it and destroy any number of artifacts or enchantments. But again, I don't mind this board state. Glowing one will keep risking people to either block it or take the rad counters, and we'll just grow some threats as we put counters on them, and that Mega Sloth has trample. So obviously it's going to start being a threat. But let me know, what do you think of Mothman down in the comment section below? Interesting deck for sure. I like the idea of the mill. A lot of our mutants have fun abilities, and as we grow them with +1/+1 counters, they get better. I kind of like this idea. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and I will catch you guys next time.